People who were born deaf but gained hearing later in life. What objects did you expect to make noise? My cousin was born deaf and went through an operation to recover part of his hearing when he was 12. He sometimes uses hearing aids but can get by without them in general. His family had a bunny, Tupu. Of course he had learned about cows mooing, cats meowing, etc. before he had his surgery. He was very shocked when he came home and greeted his bunny that it made no sound. It took the longest time for him to understand that bunnies are pretty quiet animals in general. He explained he thought all pets were loud. Honestly, I'm hearing and have a hard time with the sounds of rodents and lagomorphs. They're usually not audible to us when they make noise because it's so high pitched. When I can hear them, it's so high that it just doesn't quite sound real. Exceptions for things like guinea pigs that weak in a pretty noticeable way. My old roommate in NYC got implants at, I think he was 25 or 26. He was shocked that the radiators in the house didn't make noise. He could feel them, and was absolutely sure, given their shaking and vibrating from time to time, that they were going to be quite noisy. On the flip side, he was deeply annoyed by the buzz of fluorescent lighting, which he did not expect to make noise. On the flip side, he was deeply annoyed by the buzz of fluorescent lighting, which he did not expect to make noise. This and old CRT TVs. I have really good high range hearing, and the old CRTs straight up hurt my ears. I had a child friend that gained hearing and she didn't realize you could control the volume of your voice. So when I whispered to her she said, "Hang on, I think I need to adjust my hearing aid." At first I just thought, oh, it mustn't be working, until I realized what was going on. She whispered to me for about 2 weeks solid just to practice. D. Yes, she also practiced shouting, but we did that in secluded woodlands. That should be like the beginning of a cute but sad movie. Well, after the cochlear implant, I started hearing a lot of things that I never knew existed, but here are a few things I thought would make a noise, but nope. 1. I expected the light bulbs to hiss or flickering sound when you turned them on. I was so disappointed. 2. I thought you could hear your eyes close. Blink, but there is no sound when you close your eyelids. No whoosh. 3. You know how wind makes a noise going through trees? I thought it would make more noises going through hair. Nope. 4. Now I could hear soft sounds, but I still get spooked when I see a bug crawling, and I don't hear it. They don't make a noise at all. 5. Pooping does not make a sound, only the splash into the toilet. I thought the body makes a noise to push it out. I was disappointed. Got waterproof hearing aids. Taking a shower scared the everlasting Christ out of me. I have a cochlear implant on one side, hearing aid on the other. I don't use waterproof unless I go swimming. One time, after swimming, I decided to keep them on when I was showering, and I got shivers down my spine. I take my hearing aids out before turning the water on, and when I'm blow drying my hair, those sounds make my skin crawl. So my dad was born deaf and got a cochlear implant in his late 30s. He has since passed away, so I can't ask him this question directly, but a related story. When I was a newborn, my dad was holding me and my mom, who is hearing, was in the kitchen. My dad rushed into the kitchen with me and asked what I was saying because my mouth was moving. And my mom had to explain babies couldn't talk until they were much bigger. It's amazing how limited your perception can be if you aren't surrounded by people who can communicate with you. Unfortunately, he didn't learn how to sign until he was a young adult as well, so his formative years were basically without language. See below. He and his mother created a very basic language to identify objects and actions, but that's all. When he first heard sound, he didn't understand it and it wasn't what he expected. In response to someone clapping and asking if his implant was working after waking from surgery, he said no, it wasn't working. It was, and that it felt like movement in his head. He grew up in communist Eastern Europe where any kind of sign language was outlawed. He and his mother created their own primitive and secret sign language, and he knew very little of his native European language. Children with disabilities were sent to live in boarding schools where they were taught trade skills. However, those with disabilities were heavily discriminated against under communism as adults, so he fled to another European country as a refugee, alone, without his family who helped him escape, at the age of 18, and lived in a refugee camp before coming to the USA through the help of a charity service. He learned ASL when he moved to the US through a volunteer service. The US provided him with opportunities he never would have had otherwise. This has me thinking really hard about how hearing feels, because I've never really thought about it. I guess it does kinda feel like movement. Not sure what else I could compare it to. My friend got his hearing at age 6. He swears to this day that he thought flowers would make some sort of noise and that's what attracted bees. Nernroot makes a sound to attract adventurers. I wasn't born deaf but went deaf due to illness probably around the age of 4 months. Got my hearing back around 8 years old through surgery. I used to think traffic lights made noise. Street signs, too. Like when a stop sign has a blinking light for added visibility. I think that's actually where I got the idea in my head. They're trying to get your attention, right? So of course they must put sirens in all the traffic lights. My mom says I used to hold my ears when we drive through an intersection, though I don't remember that part. These days many of them just yell at you. Do not cross. Do not cross. You may now cross. Not me. My good friend who's hard of hearing told me about how before he got hearing aids, he thought that all fridges made a beeping sound, like an alarm, when you open them so the house knows when you're getting something. Turns out his mom just told him that to stop him from eating all their snacks. This is awesome lol. Parenting hack FTW. At least until the kids got hearing aids. My daughter suffered from recurring ear infections that went on for over a year before I could get the doctors to push for tubes in her ears. I felt that she was either unable to hear or that it was very muffled. The doctor that placed the tubes confirmed my suspicions and stating that she most likely heard noise as though she was underwater. I cannot attest to what exactly she expected to make noise, but I still tear up when I think about her face as she explored the entire house with renewed fascination. I can, however, give my subjective opinion based on her facial expressions. The thing that sticks out the most is the refrigerator. She was in awe over the humming noise that it makes, a noise that we often tune out because we are so accustomed to it. As she focused on that appliance for a bit, she made her way around to everything else that was large and stood in front of it, as if she was expecting everything to have its own secret noise. I can't say for sure, but the amount of time that she stayed with her face pressed up against the inactive washing machine and dryer leads me to believe with almost certainty that she was expecting those to hum and whir as well. At her age, you wouldn't expect her to make a correlation between similarly sized appliances, but I'll be damned if it didn't appear that way. I had a friend who was born deaf but got hearing aids. She always thought people yawning was people randomly screaming, so it always confused her why people would be screaming in the library, movies, at church, in public, etc. She never asked why were people screaming because she thought it was normal. After she got the hearing aid she thought she'd be hearing people scream when they yawned. Candles or fire? I regained my hearing at the age of 2, so I was absolutely heartbroken when I discovered that birthday candles did not make any sounds while burning. Also, I expected flashing lights to make some sort of noise. Not really sure what I expected exactly, but maybe like a siren or a loud bang. To be fair, fire does make a crackling sound, but everything else has to be really quiet, or the fire has to be really big. Again obligatory, not me, but my dad progressively went deafer as life went on and was almost 100% deaf by around age 20. He got a cochlear implant when I was around 7 years old, put them in, asked my mom are the kids always this dang loud, and proceeded to take the cochlear implant off so he didn't have to listen to my little brother and I yelling. Always thought that was funny. Honestly, being deaf when having young children probably makes parenting more tolerable. Haha. I was born with tons of fluid in my ears and only had very slight hearing at best. When I was 6 months old, I had a surgery that put tubes in my ears to drain the fluid. My mom says when I came home from surgery, I went to my toy box and shook every toy in it to see what sounds they made. Honestly, it wasn't that serious, but did lead to some auditory processing issues and I had to see a speech therapist until I was 7. Crazy what a difference 6 months of hearing makes that early on. 2 of my siblings had to get tubes in their ears at a young age. My brother had to see a speech therapist. As kids I had to do a lot of the speaking and translating for him, but now he in his 30s and only speaks with a small impediment. My 3-year-old son is deaf, and we just had a visit this morning from his signing teacher who is also deaf herself. She recently had cochlear implants fitted, and while we were talking signing she said, "I'm sorry, I can't concentrate. I can hear a horrible constant noise. It's not stopped the whole time I've been here." Turned out it was the rain on my conservatory roof. Ironically, one of the most pleasant sounds there is. Not me, but when I was in high school a bunch of kids would meet in a nearby no man's land and hang out before school started. I spent most of my mornings loudly talking to my almost deaf friend. One day he showed up and said he had a new hearing aid. I didn't have to yell at him to get him to hear me anymore. Yay. Few minutes later he asked what that noise was. I asked which noise, listening and hearing nothing out of the ordinary. "I don't know. It's like a weird beeping, almost musical. Really bizarre but actually kind of pleasing." Took me a minute to realize my man was hearing birdsong for the first time in his life. Was a pretty cool moment. I now realize this is maybe the opposite of what was being asked. That's a great story. My dad was born with severe hearing loss, but it wasn't detected until he was 50. His parents just thought he was ignorant if he didn't answer them. It's quite sad actually. His parents definitely failed him. He is also dyslexic and it's affected every part of his life and self-worth, etc. Anywho, my mum told him he needed a hearing test because the TV was starting to deafen her. He thought, oh, it's just years of loud music and using a shotgun occasionally. So he has this hearing test and some other tests etc, and gets told he was actually born deaf in one ear and significant loss in another. He can't hear phonics. You can imagine his problems through life. He finally gets hearing aids and the first day he sits down to eat a packet of crisps, he absolutely flips out. What the F is that noise? Holy shxt, my head is exploding. We had to explain you can hear the crunching of food etc, and some foods are louder than others etc. It was heartbreaking to see what he's missed out on. Now he only uses his hearing aids after a good nag from my mum. We still have to put up with his noisy eating, but he's back to ignorance is bliss, lol. My girlfriend is not deaf, but she is hard of hearing, which for her means that she can't hear high frequency sounds. She recently got hearing aids that amplify the frequencies she can't hear and was shocked to find out that birds and crickets chirp, to the point that she thought the birds were trying to attack her and was horrified that we were surrounded by millions of bugs when I explained what the crickets were. I was born with hearing, but I began losing it when I turned 1. And my parents didn't realize that I wasn't able to hear anymore. But when they finally figured out that I couldn't actually hear anymore and got bilateral cochlear implants, I was very surprised to find out that bugs, like ants and spiders and the like, don't make noises. I always just assumed that if you could feel something move, it had to make a noise. I was born deaf and got a cochlear implant when I was 27. I can hear better but rely on lip reading. I had no idea that going to the bathroom makes so much noise and that people could hear all kinds of embarrassing noises. Explains many weird looks I got before. Obligatory, not me, but my godfather dad's lifelong best friend. He was born with hearing but lost it before age 2 due to some health issues. Went his entire childhood deaf and in his 20s finally got a hearing aid. At the time, he and his wife were living in the downtown of a large city. Apparently he had it about 2 weeks before he threw it out, saying everything was too loud. He hated the noise and sound, that things were more peaceful without it. 15 years later, he moved out into the country on a few hundred acres of woods. Still, he refused to wear a hearing aid and kept refusing for the next 10 years. Finally, his wife convinced him to give it a try, and his mind was blown. He couldn't believe how quiet everything was and how much he enjoyed hearing. He finally explained that he thought the noise of the traffic downtown was the wind and that it sounded like that everywhere, all the time. So, for 25 plus years, he thought wind sounded like the hundreds of cars driving by. I too wish if I can just turn off my hearing and relax a freaking day without noise. I thought my dong made a squirting sound when I peed and didn't expect the splashing sound only when I got my hearing back at age 6. Farting became one of my favorite things and I understood why people would frown at me when I did. I can't remember what I expected to make noise, but first time I had hearing aids, I found out scratching my skin, brushing my hair and opening the door made noises. I got freaked out by birds as well. Kitchens are really noisy. I remember trying to figure out a bizarre sound to describe it was bubbling water. Oh, and when people smile, it makes a noise. Smile noise description. When people smile there is a noise I can only describe as a click as the lips brush against the teeth. Took my 6 years to figure out what it was whilst going from straight face to smiling in the mirror with hearing aids in. Open-mouthed smile only. My friends and colleagues love that I can hear them smiling without looking at them now. Everyone who read this just started smiling. I was deaf for a long amount of time, but when I got some machine to fix it, IDK what it's called, but I was very annoyed by everything. The thing I least expected to make noise was just walking and water flowing. I was born with impaired hearing but had an operation to fix it when I was very young. My dad loves to tell the story of me coming home for the first time with clear hearing. I get home, go to the bathroom to do my thing and flush. Except I had never heard a toilet flush before. I bolt out of there in tears screaming for my parents because I couldn't handle the shock that the toilet makes that much noise. To be fair, a lot of hearing kids are terrified by how loud toilets are. I honestly thought the sun would make sounds. I thought it would make sizzling sounds. It's a giant ball of fire. It's hard not to think it makes any noise. If space could transmit sound, the sun would be by far the loudest object in the solar system, as observed from the surface of Earth. I'm a pediatric audiologist, and some of the responses in this thread are a bit concerning. Let me give a quick outline about auditory development, hearing aids, and cochlear implants. Auditory development happens in various stages of varying overall importance. The critical period, birth to 3 years of age, is exactly that, critical for later speech and language development. After age 3, a person who is born deaf has a much lower chance of making sense of auditory stimuli through a cochlear implant. This does depend on the degree of deafness and previous hearing aid use. More hearing aid use and less hearing loss leads to better outcomes, but birth to 3 is incredibly important for proper language development. 3-7 is their gray area, and is generally a mixed bag of limited success and rejection of implant use. Beyond 7 years of age is very difficult for new cochlear implant users who were congenitally deaf, especially if they were not using hearing aids before. Some deaf adults will go back to get a cochlear implant because they want to hear, but they are unlikely to do well with speech and language. The auditory deprivation has already caused massive restructuring in the auditory cortex. In fact, they have found that parts of the auditory cortex will be remapped for visual stimuli in deaf adults, meaning the brain hijacked the unused auditory cortex to make room for what a person who is deaf needs. Space to make sense of visual stimuli. We often see people talking about getting hearing aids and cochlear implants later in life, and, depending on their history regarding amplification and degree of hearing loss over time, this can be helpful. But a full picture is needed, and there are really no miracle stories with exception of the miracle that a baby who is congenitally deaf can learn speech and language as well as or better than their peers if they are given good auditory training. A couple final notes on cochlear implants. Anyone who gets a cochlear implant will have access to soft sounds, but what the brain does with that information varies. Some brains can't make much sense of it at all. The notion that cochlear implants sound robotic is usually perpetuated by those who get cochlear implants later in life and are comparing to their previous hearing. This is not something we often hear from young children where cochlear implant sound is all they've ever heard. It just sounds like their ears. Finally, to get cochlear implants, there is a very extensive evaluation that takes place. The auditory component of this evaluation is very strict. You must be performing very poorly in order to qualify, except children who are born deaf. They are fast-tracked. If you have any more questions, please feel free to DM me. My ASL teacher told us that when she first drove with her cochlear implants on, she kept hearing a noise and thought the car was broken. She asked her hearing son to come with her in the car so hear the noise. She kept saying, "What is it? Don't you hear that?" But he couldn't hear it. Kept saying the car sounded fine, etc. Turns out she had her directional on, so it was clicking and she thought it was the car's engine. The son didn't notice because he was listening for a problem in the engine, not the totally normal directional clicking sound. I wasn't born deaf. but developed chronic ear infections in my left ear around 6 months of age, and as a result my eardrum and bones of hearing were completely destroyed and left me almost completely deaf in my left ear by the time I was 5-6. As a result, I never really knew what it was like to hear in stereo. At the age of 28 I had a surgery that was able to replace the bones of hearing with a single titanium piece and rebuild an eardrum. I was told it would take 6 months for my brain to relearn how to interpret the audio signal, but when I woke up from surgery I was instantly assaulted by what felt like a wall of sound. It was quite painful. At the time I had 3 kids, ages 8, 5, and 3. One of the biggest shocks to me was the sheer volume of noise that my children could make. The first day we were home I turned to my husband and asked, "Have our kids always been this loud?" The other biggest shock was surround sound. A year or so before my surgery my husband had gone out and spent a good sum of money on a surround sound system for our house. I was livid. What a waste of money. The first time we watched a movie in surround sound after my surgery however, I was in awe. My husband just laughed at me as I kept turning from side to side saying, "Did you hear that? Things are actually moving around the room." When the movie was finished I sat in stunned silence for a moment before turning to him and saying, "I get it. That was worth every penny." My professor who is deaf recently shared a story like this. She came home one day from class and her roommate asked her if she was hungry. Professor said, "Yes, I'm starving. I haven't eaten all day." "But how do you know?" The roommate explained she could hear her stomach grumbling. My professor freaks out that her organs make noise and other people can hear inside her body. The class was dying from laughter. I had a cousin who was born deaf and got their hearing fixed at the age of 9. Don't know how, but surgery I think. They didn't realize that everything made noises. Wind, water, breathing, chewing, and they were annoyed for a few weeks but got used to it. Cochlear implant most likely. My son got hearing aids just about 6 months ago. He had a mid-range hearing loss at about 50% total loss. He was shocked at how much noise rain makes. He also was surprised to learn that when he rubs his hand across fabric, leather seats, clothes, etc., that it makes noise. Poor kid. He had to discover background noise at 12 and then go through the process of making it background noise. The biggest change for him was learning that people have different voices. He could generally tell male from female, but he said that basically women all sounded the same and men all sounded the same. I guess pitch was completely absorbed by his hearing loss. Poor kid. He had to discover background noise at 12 and then go through the process of making it background noise. As I understand it, a lot of autistic people have to deal with that, too. It's very difficult for a lot of them to filter out sounds that allistic people can easily ignore. Lightning. I thought that the vibration from thunder came from the lightning and expected that to make a super loud noise. Didn't realize it was thunder and lightning. At the audiologist's office I put on my hearing aids for the first time ever. Then I left and proceeded to drive to work. Along the way, I kept hearing a wheezing sound and at first I thought there was something wrong with the car's exhaust system. Finally, I realized that what I was hearing was my own breathing. I was born deaf but later got my hearing. I thought that when all doors would open and close that they would make super loud noises, but not all do. Then I also thought that literally everything made noise, but I was very disappointed. I dated a deaf guy who thought boobs made noise. He one time signed to our friends the jiggle, like in anime. How loud is it? And we were so confused. We were like, they don't make noise, and he was peeved because his anime shows apparently had noisy tea and his captions told him so. I was deaf till about 6-7 years old. I remember my brother being afraid of spiders and he was very embarrassed about it. He explained that when spiders enter a room they scream and make loud noises and that is what startled him. So once I was able to hear. Every time I saw a spider I would stare, just anticipating it to scream. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.